Welcome to Arash's World. Today we have a special guest, Michael Phillips. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hello, Rash. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on.
Very good. Thank you. I'm doing well. And so I would like to get started here with a personal introduction of yourself, however you see fit, and then we'll dive into the discussions that we have here.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Michael Phillips, and I am an author of the new book, Wrong
Congrats.
Lanes Have Right Turns. And I'm also a social entrepreneur and education advocate.
Wonderful. And you're also a pastor. You're a
That is
pastor,
correct.
right? Education advocate.
Yes.
And your book, and congrats, your book is Wrong Lanes Have Right Turns. I like the title very much.
Oh,
And
thank you.
so if we can get started a bit to talk about your personal experiences and whatever you see fit and whatever is comfortable to you, let's just dive in and just see what are your personal life experiences here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my story is probably like most people's stories. As a matter of fact, in the book, I say that my story probably could have been told by a million different people a million different times. I came from a working class family, wonderful, wonderful family. Mom and dad who loved all of us. I'm the youngest of four kids, so I have three siblings, older brother and two sisters. I'm the youngest. I'm the baby. And when I was 12, my father passed away suddenly, and it kind of said it didn't kind of, it actually sent a lightning bolt through our family. And we all grappled with the loss of our dad in different ways. And for me in particular, the way I grappled with it was to become a little rebellious and to give into some of the dark elements that were in my community. And so that created a lot of trauma for me coming up as I was a young man and a young teen.
No doubt. That is very, very difficult, and I'm sorry to hear that. But from your trauma, you did not get stuck. And trauma is something that I talk about on my program a lot. And I am very impressed when people have break the cycle, they have the resilience, the strength to break that cycle. And so what would you say has helped you to reinvent yourself in many ways and to get out of the dark place?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when trauma goes unacknowledged, right?
Mm.
Then the tragedies that come from that trauma can constantly remain and go uninterrupted. But once you can acknowledge that pain, once you can actually say, "This is what I'm dealing with," or "This is what happened to me," right? Once you can do that, then that's the beginning of that discovery that lets you know it's something that happened or it's something that you did, but it's not who you are,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
As long as your identity is connected to what happened, then it's going to be very hard to break that cycle. But the
mhm.
moment that you realize that your identity is not that event, then you get the power to start to do the work that's necessary to pull yourself out of it with a lot of help, right? With a lot of help.
It's
And I had a
very
lot of help.
hard. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
difficult. But the
yeah.
first step is really acceptance, I find. And then
That's
like
right.
once you have that, then you have control and you have a choice. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much choice they have. Some have more than others, right? And
Yeah,
we're going to talk
yeah,
about education in a moment of making sure that there are more
yeah.
choices given to everyone. But even so, there is a certain amount of choice that we have and control over some things, and then to try to make that grow. But we do
Absolutely.
want to help. So you're also an education advocate. I have been in education for pretty much all my life, 20
Yeah.
years in schooling and then 20 years of teaching. So I've been on both
Wow.
sides and I
Wow.
have experienced it. And so, yeah, let's talk about education. So what do you advocate? What would you say?
Yeah, so I advocate to make sure that all children, particularly in the United States, right, regardless of their zip code, have access to high quality education. The education in the states, as we know it, has many inequities for children, regardless of race and or socioeconomic class and status. And so, in my opinion, the system as we know it was not created for all kids. It's not personalized enough. So we have a lot of work to do on that front. But particularly as I lay out in my story, I was in a horrible school growing up. Horrible in the sense of its actual physical presence, and then also the content of what was being taught as well. And I was completely bored out of my mind, not receiving the information and the tools that I needed to keep me engaged as a learner, and not allowing me to understand that, I mean, learning happens everywhere. And I wanted to be a lifelong learner, but that wasn't possible because of the type of culture that was in my uh, K through 12 experience.
Mhm.
And so the reason why I've become an education advocate was because those same inequities that I suffered, the same atrocities that I went through, are still prevalent today. And so from experience and also from a heart of empathy and compassion, I advocate for all children to have access to a high quality education because that's what they deserve. That's what they deserve.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is also in terms of education, in terms of the philosophy of education. And so when you're saying that you're bored and you didn't feel engaged, and I think that is across the board, that was across the board. And I see
Mhm.
some movement in the right direction of really like the focus is the student. And we have
Right.
to encourage their learning, their motivation. It's not just about grades. I mean, we do need to evaluate students, but it's really to make them grow and to go with that growth and to realize that each individual has different needs and different ways of learning and different capabilities as well. And I think I feel like being on both sides, I
Yeah.
feel we are moving in the right direction. But then there's another problem, which is a more political and social issue. And that is
Hmm.
something that is, I think we're still far behind in that. We have to move
Yeah.
forward. Yeah,
Absolutely. Like who has access to the
exactly.
direction that we're moving into, right?
Mhm.
And so inevitably some children are being left behind, unfortunately, and that's what we have to make sure does not happen, particularly today. You know, I grew up during a crack epidemic, you know.
Mhm.
These kids are growing up during a, you know, a pandemic. And you know, it's a crisis on both ends. And with the amount of learning loss, the amount of time out of school, and all the things that they have to grapple with right now, we have a lot of work to make sure that no child is being left behind.
Absolutely. And I'm impressed with kids, how they handle the situation. And I don't think they get enough
Yes,
credit. And they're actually not
very
given credit
resilient.
for how they're handling this. And
Yes,
we really need to focus on that. And again, going back to their also emotional needs and
yes,
making sure that that is addressed, because it must be hard. It's terrifying for us, the pandemic.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it must be so much more so for them because we at least have had some life experience, but they are basically very confused of what's going on. So how can we make sure that we're going in a way that's healthy, but safe, but it's also addressing the needs, the mental health of children? What can we do?
yeah. You know, I think it doesn't have to be a either or choice. It needs to be both and. I think we
Mhm.
can keep our children safe as well as giving them all the tools they need to move forward, right? And so we've responded, you know, to this crisis, you know, in a number of ways, right? We've provided funding to all types of institutions and individuals where there was needed in the sense of emergency. And so in this emergency response for our children, we have to make sure that first of all, they're safe. That's number one.
Mhm. I
And then
completely
second
agree.
of all, right, they're
Mhm.
safe. And then second of all, that they have all the resources that they need when they do return to school. And it can be done. This crisis has proven to us that we can think outside the box and meet this challenge that's in front of us because we've kind of already done it in some cases. So where education is concerned, we need to measure everything. We need to fund everything, right? That needs to be an emergency response to this situation. So let's fund what needs to be funded, and then of course we can measure it all to see what's working and what's not working for the benefit of our children. And we'll keep after tweaking it as we go. But it's work that needs to be done.
And education is so important. I mean, I am, of course, biased because I am in education myself, but I think just seen objectively, it's hugely important for society. So I'm shocked that there is not enough funding for it. And there are budget cuts, and programs get cut
Yeah.
as well. And like things like that are important too, like things like music or art or kind of creative expressions are
Yeah.
deemed as like, second rate, and are given the cut as well. So I think we really have to really focus on the importance of education, accept how hugely important it is, and that everybody will benefit from it. The whole society, the whole country would benefit if we take this seriously. So I'm
Yeah.
shocked when I hear that there are constantly budget cuts around.
Education is really the solution, right, to a lot of our plight.
Mhm.
If you fix that, you fix a lot of different things, right? If you fix education, you're going to fix housing, you're going to fix criminal justice. You're going to touch a lot of things because all those systems are interconnected. And so when it comes to the priorities that we have in terms of educating our kids, the idea and the concept of education was that we would pool our resources right together for the benefit of educating all of our children. But what has resulted from that idea is that each individual child, right, each parent, rightfully so, is concerned about their child, right?
Mhm.
That's one thing. And then, of course, the system itself isn't built or constructed to actually handle, right, each and every individual child. And so it's kind of, just wholesale, one one size fits all approach to it. And that actually doesn't work. And so we do know what works. You see the models across the country and in different places around the world that actually are getting tremendous outcomes. We just have to have the wherewithal as a priority, right, to make that possible for every child. So I always say it's priority, it's people, and it's pace, right? It's priority because that's where it starts. Is this important to us? Yes. It's people. It's going to take us as individuals to continue to advocate, raise our voices in every community to say this is what we want for our children. And then there's pace. There's an urgency to this that we have to move, because that kindergarten, that first grader, that second grader, it's a finite amount of time. Okay, we don't have forever to get it right. And so I'm hoping that we can move with priority as people and move with pace.
And one thing, yes, so we're talking about access, and it is a basic fundamental right, and we really have
That's
to
right.
make sure this is again a priority, yes, but it's
Yeah,
not a privilege. It is a basic right for everyone, and
that's right.
that's one thing. I think one of the issues might be, and again talking about the unconscious and that we might have, this like bias that we might have, was basically about 1994, I think, the book Bell Curve, that talks about IQ and academic achievement. And basically the whole like focus was on genes, and that you cannot change that. And we know that is completely wrong. We do know with
Right.
neuroplasticity that the brain does change and so on.
Yes.
So it's not scientific. But then even worse was the assumption that people and Black people here, specifically African Americans, but also other minorities, would not be able to, are not as smart. First, that's one of the assumptions. They're not as
That's
smart
right.
as white people.
That's right.
Asian people are the smartest, and then the white, and then so that kind of class system, which is bogus, which is completely unscientific, and but that's, I think, stayed in the back of many people's minds, that if
Sure.
you're not smart, then you cannot get better. So education would be a waste of time and resources, and I
Yes.
think we really need to talk about that.
It wasn't until my senior year in high school when an adult told me that I was intelligent. It's amazing to me that you're absolutely right. That I always say, like, bias blocks our blessings, right? What we're not willing to see, but what we're willing to confirm. So confirmation bias says that I'm going to look for information that proves
Yes.
what I believe, right? Right? That's a confirmation bias. And then there is, your explicit bias, just total prejudice towards, someone that is of a different race, right, or culture. But then there is implicit bias, which is the most dangerous, because you're not critically conscious enough. You're not aware that you hold these beliefs based upon some curated thought or image that you have been given, that you held as true, and you never questioned it, right?
Yes.
So for me, as a young Black male coming up in school, I was not believed in intellectually.
Mhm.
The only place I was prompted to do anything great was physically as an athlete, and so, but no one ever really was curious about my intellect until my senior year in high school, because I got great grades, even though I didn't care about school. School was easy to me. The work was easy. It was not fulfilling at all. I could do it with a breeze without any study whatsoever. And so, intelligence, is discerned. You have to know that you have it. Where we all have our own genius, right?
Mm.
And our own way of learning. And so, what bias does is it really blocks our blessings. And what I mean by that is that the innate genius that's in you or in a child, the world needs.
Yes.
And if you and if you don't believe that they have it, then we're robbing our own selves of the gift of that person that's in this world that could produce something that's absolutely amazing.
Completely agree with you. And there are different types of intelligences too. I mean, we have emotional
Right.
intelligence. We have like also
That,
curiosity is that's very interesting. That's something that people have, and it makes you explore things, and you
that's
reach
right.
knowledge that way. So there's just it's just a very limited view in any way. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things social psychologist Claude Steele talks about stereotype threat. And
Mm.
when he talks about that, it really, they have research and they have proven in studies that this is something that we all carry within us as stereotype
Yes.
threats. So for example, that idea is like, yes, you are from this race, so you won't do well in school. You are Asian, so you will do well in math. And so what that does in many ways, it is kind of feeding that insecurity, that anxiety that we have. And they show that people actually, when that is going on, people do worse. They achieve because they block themselves. They achieve
Yeah.
less, and they should be
Yeah.
capable of doing it. But it goes with everybody, and so that is the problem we have, because we expect people to be a certain way, and that is a stereotype. At the same time, we're afraid of falling into that exception, so we try extra hard not to appear that way, and then we
Right.
make things very complicated. And he
Right.
gave an example of basically a white teacher and Black parents talking about the child. And so there's this like fear of the white person of appearing racist. And then there's the fear of the Black people, of the child not seeming intelligent or being lazy. And then so this
Yeah.
interaction is not going to be natural at all. And it won't be helpful for anybody who's
Yeah.
involved there. And I found
Yeah.
that fascinating to really to realize that. And when they took that away and they said, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, it's a math test. And we found that on this math test, men and women do equally well. And what happened is that was actually the result, because the women were not afraid or intimidated by that stereotype threat. And so it went a different direction. So I think one thing we need to make sure in classrooms is that it is a safe environment. I try to do that with my language classes too. I say, you know what, you make a mistake, it's okay. I'm not gonna, it's not the end of the world, and that's how you learn. But I think
Right.
we need that across the board, that everybody's voice is important, that everybody's heard, that again, intelligent is not just like assumed, oh, because you're from this country or this race, you are more intelligent than others, but actually to see things in a more balanced way. And I think that is missing still today.
Yeah, absolutely. It is missing. The word educate itself, right? It
Mhm.
it, it really means to pull out, right?
Mhm.
Not so much to pour in. And so each
Yes, I
child
like
that's
that.
sitting in the each
Mhm.
child that's sitting in the classroom has something to offer,
Mhm.
right? And they're on this journey of self-discovery. And we as parents and teachers and all those who play a part in a role in their life have the responsibility to make sure that we're showing our children their giftings and their talent and helping to cultivate them. And so, empowerment is always an inside job. And our kids to feel that empowerment really comes from when their educational experience is good and healthy for them, because they'll thrive in the world. And so, the work of every educator is sacred to me. So thank you for being one. Thank you for being one, because it's a tall task, and whatever you've contributed to those young people, I'm sure it was an absolute amazing experience for them. And so, to your point, though, having our children in that safe environment, in that space where we're busting all of those stereotypes, right? Where they don't even feel a shred of that, where race doesn't even come into the picture. This is what we really long for, right? That it's okay to have your differences and have your ethnicity. We want you to acknowledge that. We don't need you to be colorblind. Yes, if this is a Black child, this is a Latino child, or whatever your race or ethnicity is, acknowledge that. We want to embrace your culture, and we want to make sure that we're culturally competent, right? As to relate to your world, so that you can navigate this world of education and enlarge your perspective. Because until we acknowledge your culture and your world, you're not going to be open, right, to a different perspective or different way of doing something. I'll tell you like this. I love to cook, right? I love to cook.
Cool.
And, we went to, my wife and I, we went to Mexico, and this chef wanted to cook a lot of different food for us. And as he was cooking, I was watching and noticing, some of his techniques and some of the food, even though nuanced, it's kind of just like, something I would make or eat. It has a little bit different flavor, a little bit different uniqueness to it, but it's really connected, right? But he was showing me different ways of doing what they do and adding their flavor and culture to it, which enlarged my perspective. That's all education is, right? That's all it is. To put you in a setting where you can learn and see, hey, here's a possibility, or hey, here's a better way of doing it, or hey, here's a possible answer, right? Because life doesn't give you one right answer. There's multiple.
I love the analogy of like these are the ingredients. Now cook up something and you make your own dish, and we want more of that. We don't want the same regurgitation of like knowledge, and it's like, and that's like, again, we've moved in a different direction. One thing I just remembered earlier when you talked about not being engaged, and because you are smart and you knew this stuff. But the problem is, though, that the confirmation bias that people have and the fundamental attribution error, that is kind of, they see things in a different way. So the assumption is because you're not engaged, you look bored, you're lazy. And that is not the case. And it doesn't also depend on race, but it gets worse when racial factors.
It really does.
But we see it with students today in Canada, where I am, and a lot of them are just medicated after that. They say they're diagnosed with ADHD when they don't actually have it. And they're restless and they're bored because the information is boring, right? And even if you put an adult in that situation, they would roll their eyes as well. And so when we step in the direction of the students and work with them and give them what they want, what they need, that would make a huge difference. And I see school more, it's like prison time. Yeah, you got your time. Okay, you spent all year in this class. Now you can move on. But it's like, it doesn't work that way. Some people need less time. Some people need more time. And we need to address that. But to address that, we also need more budget, more time, more patience, strong teachers, and a society that really supports that as well. So it is complicated.
It's very complicated. And, anytime you're trying to reform, reshape, reimagine something, people who benefit from the status quo are going to be opposed to that change. And so we really have to ask ourselves, who's benefiting the most from things remaining the same? Our children are not, right? And so we have to find a way. And there are some models out there. There are some phenomenal schools that are getting it done. But we have to find a way to broaden that and to scale that to make sure that every child has access to that. There was a young man, to your point of stereotypes, there was a young man, he was a third grader. I was visiting schools years ago, trying to figure out what was working in my city and what wasn't. And on one school visit, I met this young man. He was standing in the corner of a classroom, to the point where I was kind of disturbed because I didn't understand why. So I asked the teacher, I said, is he in trouble? She said, no, he always stands up in the corner. And they had mislabeled this young man, okay, as to have special needs, which he did not. And so I went over I asked the teacher, I said, can I go talk to this young man? She said, yes. I said, great. So I go and tap him on the shoulder. He turns around, just a bright young man. He tells me his name. I shake his hand. I tell him mine. Tells me his name is Calvin. And we have this wonderful conversation about this class and how he loves this class. And I say to him, Calvin, if I can ask you a question, why are you standing in the corner? And he pointed to his chair and he said, my chair is broken. It was one of the greatest revelations I've ever had in my life. Here you have this amazing young person who is interested in science. He wants to be an engineer, but he's standing up in the corner of a classroom, right? And he has this label on him that he has a learning disability. And if you have a learning disability, that's okay, right? But he has been told that he has a learning disability, when in fact, he just decides to stand up in the corner because of a broken chair. And he got tired of getting in trouble for falling out of the chair because it was slanted, right? And so, that sort of thing right there is, as small as that may be, how many of Calvins are there in the educational world, right? In schools across our country and Canada, how many young people are in a position where they're not being acknowledged for who they are, right? They're just being told, what they are, right? That's the stereotype.
And communication there, talking, and this is such a moving story, but talking to the child and finding the reason, why are you standing up? It's a simple question, and that would have solved the issue. And empathy, of saying, okay, this is not done out of meanness, but having empathy with the children. And one of the things I've learned recently, I have a teenage son, but I was looking at the brain, and I talked to various experts about the brain of teens. And in many cases, because the brain is growing, they don't remember things, or it's not that it's intentional and they want to defy us, which would be kind of our perception of it, but it's because they actually genuinely forgot, and that the brain is overwhelmed with stuff, with growth and so on. So that changed my perspective of, and that's adolescence is goes up to the mid-20s. So that's the group of students I would have. And then when they would forget their homework, maybe it wasn't laziness, maybe it's because they genuinely forgot. So that changed that. I do have a lot of empathy in my classes, but that made it even more so, because I cannot just make that assumption. It might be true in many cases, but in some cases it's not. And I had the privilege many years ago, to work with in a school that had at-risk students. And it was just for a summer. And I was surprised because the students I had were amazing. They were bright, they were brilliant. And they're probably some of the best students I've had. And I'm thinking, why are they labeled at risk? It just didn't make sense to me. And it's kind of, I think that negative bias that we have, or the preconceptions of things, this means that, and not really exploring it, not being curious about the other person and the students in this case.
Totally. If we could just change our language where our children are concerned and remove all deficit narratives, those children that we label at risk are really at promise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what we should be saying about them is that, they're at promise. They have some predicaments, they have some situations that are difficult to overcome, but they are still at promise young people because they're young people. They're they have a long way to go until they become, adult citizens. And so they're still within our grasp and within our reach to be able to shape and mold them. And so let's just say they're at promise instead of saying they are at risk. The deficit narrative as it relates to our children really does need to change and be disrupted so that we're talking about our children's future with the most positivity that we can possibly use around them and when they're not around, so that we can get it etched in our hearts and in our minds. And that takes empathy, to your point, right? And so I like to say that empathy doesn't need a lot of details, it just needs a mirror. If you can see yourself, right, and the possibility of where your life could have went wrong, then it's very easy to see somebody else. Yeah.
And I would expand it to the home, to the family. And I think that deficit language also exists within families. And we look at
Yes.
parents, and they are in a way, it's not intentional, of course, but in a way they continue to facilitate that downward spiral and that lack of confidence in one's abilities. And we really
Yes.
have to educate ourselves too
We do.
as parents, and we're hugely influential and responsible for our children, not completely, of course, but to a very large degree, making
Absolutely.
sure that the home is a safe place. Now, in terms, as much as we can, of course, if you're in a
Yeah.
lower socioeconomic strata, it's more difficult. There is noise and there are many people and you can't study. But to, again, provide that kind of empathy, that power that you have, encouraging them to continue. And I think we need to work on that and be more aware of that as
Yeah.
parents in our families.
Absolutely. It's uh when my son was born, I made every effort to make sure that the words I spoke over him were always positive, always affirming, always loving, even when he got it wrong, right?
Yes, of course.
Even when he got it wrong. And as parents, that's our responsibility. And so hopefully, um, in the school and out of school, when it comes to our children, we can use that asset-based language, right?
Mhm.
As we talk about our children,
Mhm.
it would be much better for them, much better for us.
And to break cycles, because people say, well, when I was a kid, I got spanked and disciplined and all that. And we say, okay, that was in its own time, but now we have to go with the
Right.
times. And we know that that was wrong. They did not know back then, or
That's right.
maybe they might have an inkling, but again, we can't blame them for it. But we
Hmm.
do know now, and that is not helping. So it's also a change of culture and mindset and the way we approach things and situations. And what you're saying is wonderful. And I think those experience, those mistakes, I encourage them, because from those mistakes is where the learning happens. If you just do it in a safe way, you will never learn anything.
That's
But the
right.
growth
That's right.
comes from the mistakes, from the suffering. But what they need, the children need, is support, emotional support, that it's going to be okay. They're not going to be punished for making mistakes, but they will be
Right.
reminded, and we think about the brain again. Often they lack the way of thinking that we have, the rational thinking that we take for granted. They are still developing. So that
Mhm.
again goes back to the empathy and connection and compassion that we should have also within our homes, and not just in
Yes.
schools, but also within.
Yes. What that power produces is the ability to parent and or teach for that child's future,
Mhm.
not from our past, right?
Mhm. Yes, very true.
So in other words, as a parent, I was helping to parent my son for the future he would have, not from the past I experienced, right? So I wasn't going to stop him from trying something or doing something that I didn't get a chance to do when I was his age, or,
And many
you
parents
know,
do, which is so frustrating
exactly,
for everyone,
exactly.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
our children are not going to live in our time. You understand?
Absolutely.
They're going to be adults in a different world, in a different space, and we have to prepare them for that world, not for the world where we are in right now, right?
And it's
And
natural
so
though, if I can butt in. I mean, I love classical music and I try to instill it with my son, but he just doesn't like it. And so at some point, I have to accept that. And that's not a thing. And then he does things that I don't like, but I say, okay, you know what? I have to be open-minded. I respect that. I don't agree
yeah,
with it, but it's not what I would
right,
do. But sure, you listen to
right.
whatever you want to listen, you know? And we try to enforce things, and it comes out of a good place probably, because you say, oh, this worked for
Absolutely.
me, it will work for you. But things
Yeah.
are different, things are changing. In my time, we did not have technology that we have today. So
Oh
my
God.
son is
Can you
way ahead of
imagine?
me. I ask for help from him, because
Yeah, me too.
and so that has also made us much smarter. I think the kids much smarter.
Mhm.
I'm trying to catch up, and but the information age, access to good TV programs. If I remember, like the cartoons I used to watch, and just think, oh my God, like there's no educational value there. It was just
Right,
garbage. And
right.
and now there is like all this movement to incorporate that. So we are growing more intelligent. There is more access to knowledge and so on. And we really have to build on this momentum and not
Yes.
block it with things like limitations. And that is either from our family or from outside or from the media or from our teachers.
Yes.
And to really kind of find ourselves, our inner voice, our talents, our vocation, and be able to take that path and not be
Yeah.
discouraged, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I completely agree with you. One of the things yeah, I did with my daughter in terms of music,
Okay.
I told her, I said, everything you're listening to was sampled, okay? And here's the original. Here's who wrote that sound, and it really created this wonderful bridge between past and present. And I grew an appreciation for the music that she loved, and she grew an appreciation for the music that I loved. And by the way, I love classical music as well.
I
you
love all
know,
kinds of music, but
yeah,
it's
me too,
also,
me
that
too.
is something that I was, now I've learned actually what I best thing to do is just to listen to it and to enjoy it,
Yeah,
because then
yeah,
there's this curiosity. It's like my son would say, oh, this piece sounded interesting. I say, okay. Now I can tell you about it, instead of forcing him to, like, you sit here and listen, that
right,
doesn't work.
right. No, no, not at all, not at
Yeah,
all,
and
not at
he
all.
would get bored when I take him to classical concerts, but I should like be more compassionate and say, okay, well, probably it is boring for him. I mean, his view, it is boring, and I'm just enjoying it. So being open in that way, and in everything we do, especially in relationship with our children, who are
Yes.
these like these promising beings, and
Hmm.
to if they are successful in school, and they graduate from college, that's great. That's what I would prefer. But to find
Yeah,
another way, that's fine too, as long as they're happy. And as you're
yeah,
saying, I think, yes, the world is changing. We don't know what's going to happen. Even like a couple of years ago, I had no idea I would work remotely, that I would
yeah.
do a podcast. You had told me 3 years ago, I would say, no, that's not my thing. And now I'm loving it. I'm doing it and I'm enjoying it. And so it's that kind of openness to go with the times, to go with the flow, and
Yeah,
not blocking ourselves to that. Just kind of, and so things are changing. So the needs in the future, the jobs in the future, we don't really know. And so that's
right.
the problem with education too, because they're still preparing the old style, the old way of doing things. But what we need is not, of course, knowledge is important, but it's more like wisdom, applied knowledge, because anybody
Hmm.
can Google anything. So
Right.
that has changed, and that's actually is a threat for teachers. When they say something, a student can
Right.
just Google and it's like, "Sir, you're wrong on what you just told us," and
Right.
that is a kind of threat we see. And to I think one of the issues is also not to seek perfection, whether
Hmm.
within ourselves or within our children, but to be able to just explore and let them grow. And they will not be perfect, and that's okay, but they're as
Yeah.
good. They try their best. And that idea of perfection is creating a lot of pressure. And I think especially on minorities these days, because they try to make up for what they see as a lack. and they try to work too hard and too much pressure on themselves. And I think that is something that, and it again happens to everyone, we need to deal with. If you make mistakes, if I make mistakes as an instructor, it's normal, it's human. Nobody
Yeah,
is perfect or can be perfect, and you don't want to be perfect because that sounds pretty boring anyway.
yeah,
There's no
no
room for
doubt.
growth. Yeah.
Yeah, no room for growth. And,
Yeah.
it's not about perfection. It's just about being present.
Yes.
Being present as a parent, being present as a human being present as a person. And that's how the growth comes. That's how the development comes.
Mhm.
It's not a pursuit so much of perfection. It's just, am I present right now in this moment? And it's in our society, I think that the pressure to perform is just as difficult, regardless of where you come from. To perform, to get somewhere,
Mhm.
to do
Yes.
something, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves because our culture is so punitive, right?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
it's not a culture of possibility, as much as it is, a culture of punishment. If I mess up, if I get this wrong,
Yes.
I'm going to be punished.
Yeah.
And so we have some cultural work to do, to understand that, um, you're the perfect individual that we're talking about doesn't exist, right? And
Yeah, it reminds me. Sorry, this brings back to mind when I went to my old high school in Germany. I grew up in Germany and studied there,
okay.
and so I've heard these kids talking about a grade in their German literature class, and one of them was worried, and it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And I just wanted to turn to him and say, you know what? It's okay. It doesn't matter. That grade in that class will not change anything. And I did not get a good grade. And look where I am. And I am successful. But we fret over things and we are
Mhm.
scared. And we think it's the end of the world if we fail a class or fail an exam. And there's also this competition. And yeah, absolutely agree with you in terms of our society, like pushing us to compete with others. But that
Mhm.
competition, it's good at times, but it also exists within the same organization where it's like the same workplace. People are competing with each other. I'm thinking that is not helpful, because where is the team building? Where is that connection? Where is like, I support you and you support me? But we're always
Mhm.
like on the guard. It's like, no, I want to be better than this other person. I want to be
Right.
superior. And there is no break. There's no respite.
Yeah.
We keep going, 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 and we don't have time to be present, as you're saying.
Yeah, we don't. And so that stems from this meritocracy
Mhm.
that we have in our culture, and exceptional individualism, which I don't think is really a thing, right? Because
Mhm.
every individual that has become exceptional has had help from somebody to be exceptional. you, you didn't just get there by yourself. You didn't arrive by yourself. Somebody opened the door, somebody showed you some knowledge, somebody gave you some wisdom, somebody helped you up. And that's what we have to tap into, that deepened community, right? Where we are connected in a way from place of humanity that says, we want you to become the best version of you, right? To
Yes.
contribute your highest good to society, because it's going to help us in the long run,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
We'll
absolutely.
all benefit from it. And
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
Wonderful discussion. So your book is Wrong Lanes Have Right Turns, A Pardoned Man's Escape from the School to Prison Pipeline and What We Can Do to Dismantle It. And that is
Yes.
also the work that you're doing in terms of being an advocate for education and to
Yes.
make sure that people learn from your experiences, that it doesn't happen again. It's not something that other people suffer from as well, just kind of paving the way for others. You're also
Mhm.
the founder of LifePrep, and just want to briefly also talk about that before we wrap up for
Yeah,
today.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
life prep is a concept that hopefully will be able to help the children from low income and socioeconomic backgrounds get access to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math in a life setting, right? And so life doesn't stop. It's every day, all day. It doesn't stop, and therefore learning should not stop, right? It happens everywhere. So our goal is to make sure that we're providing those exposure points and access to a tremendous education for children, but also for their parents as well. Because
Okay, that's wonderful.
sometimes,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's you have to go, you have to work dual generationally in order to break those cycles and have some significant impact for the whole family. And so we came up with this idea of life prep. Let's prepare children, students, families for life. Let's do that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's life prep, man, and we're just getting it off the ground, but we're very excited about it.
Oh, love it. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being on my show, for talking to me about these wonderful ideas. Best of luck.
Yes.
Congrats to your book and best of luck
Thank
with
you.
it. And thank
Thank
you
you
so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Raj. Thank you for having me.
Take care.